number 6 in our series. My name is Frederick Nybig. I'm the Managing Director for MedTech Innovator, based here with the MTI APAC team in Singapore. Today's webinar is going to be focused on clinical trial management and running hospital pilots. Our title here, as you can see, is Evidence That Matters, Running Clinical Trials, Pilots, and Post-Market Studies that Drive Adoption. We have a terrific panel here, and I'll have the panelists introduce themselves in just a moment. Let me just welcome our cohort companies as well. I know we have some of you dialing in from Europe at a very early hour, and some of you dialing in from North America. So good evening to those of you dialing in late. With that, let me just say 2 words about MedTech Innovator for those of you not familiar with who we are. We are the world's largest accelerator for traditional medical devices, digital health, and in vitro diagnostics. 717 alumni companies globally that have gone on to raise $3.5 billion in follow-on funding. This webinar is part of our educational curriculum for our current cohort. We are making the first 60 minutes available to the general public through our live stream. So welcome to our live streaming audience as well. And then at the top of the hour, we will cut the live stream and we'll go into closed door Q&A with our cohort. So let me turn to our panel. We have dialing in from Los Angeles, California, Julian Brohan. Welcome, Julian, from Cedars-Sinai. I'll have him introduce himself in just a moment. He's with the MedTech Ventures group there. We have Dr. Karen Wai, Chief Strategy Officer at Avis. So Avis Health, some of you based here in Singapore will be familiar with the organization. I'll let Karen tell you more. They are not only an alum of MedTech Innovator, but they have also been through the Cedars-Sinai program. And finally, welcome to Jolin Lim, founder and CEO at Agapa Life. And I'll have each of you introduce yourselves. So maybe let me turn to Julian first. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization, and then we'll get into the conversation here.
All right. No, thanks, Frederick. Thanks for the invite. I'll try to be brief, but yeah, there's a lot to unpack with Tech Ventures, part of Cedars-Sinai. My role is the MedTech Ventures Director, meaning looking inwardly, in our own invention that we create at Cedars and try to spin them off. And we're also looking outwardly at companies from all over the world, try to bring them at Cedars. And every time it's really about improving patient care. And that's how we met with Avis. And that's how we are, in Singapore. We've been, partnering with Singapore stakeholders for many years now, to a point that we even created a venture fund there called Coronet Ventures. Colin Tan is leading that group there, and to invest in companies from Singapore and to bring them to Cedars for clinical trials or pilots. We also have an accelerator that we help companies come to Cedars. Avis was class 8. It just the bridge between Singapore and LA. Like, this is Tech Venture. This is what we're trying to do. So thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you. And Avis is also an investee company of your fund, I believe.
It is, yes, as well. One of our first portfolio company from Coronet Ventures Singapore.
Excellent, thanks. And Karen.
Hey, Frederick. So thank you very much for the invite. Great to be here. So I'm Karen Wai. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Avis Health. But just a bit background. So Avis is we'll call ourselves really a deep tech, medtech company, really working on the respiratory space, really trying to tackle the problems, trying to make sure that care for patients, asthma, COPD in particular, they can actually self-manage at home. So that's in a nutshell. And just to give you guys an idea, we have been, as a startup, it's been a couple of years already, spun out from NTU. So we have walked the path I think some of the sort of like participants are going to be in. So happy to share whatever we can in terms of trying to make sure you don't, I guess, face the same challenges, or you're more aware, so that you can tackle them better.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Karen. And Jolin, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Frederick, my ex-colleagues, and so is Karen, my ex-colleagues from Quintal. Hi, good morning to everyone. I'm Singapore-born and overseas returned from United States. I lived in US for the 15 years, was trained in the University of Minnesota Medical School Department of Surgery, as well as conducted more than 5,000 patients trials in US, and majority of them, 2,500 of the patient study is a registered study coming from Harvard Medical School. And I've actually worked and personally conducted clinical trial from the beginning to the end of the whole clinical process for the rest of the 2,500 coming from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinics, as well as the Fortune 10 company that I worked in. So currently, I run an advisory consulting company called Agape Line MedTech and Healthcare Group, to start up like yourself to bring my knowledge and experience from the US trial to the Asia Pacific. And I did work as a directors for medical technology clinical trial at Quintal and at another smaller SMC consulting companies such as NAMSA for the Asia Pacific. So I do have both regions knowledge and experiences, and I'm here to try to help you to be successful.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Jolene. So let's begin by talking a bit about what it's like for a startup working with a CRO and manage that clinical trial process. And maybe I'll turn to Karen first. Why would a startup, whether Avis or anyone else here on the call, want to work with an external advisor like a CRO to run their trials? Is it not possible to do some of this in-house? What was your take on this when you started to plan your clinical trial activities at Avis?
Great question. And I think it's not a simple yes or no. I think just to give an idea of the background that I do have, as sort of like Jolene alluded to. So I've worked in CRO for majority of my career. Actually, now it's going to tip over to the other side. I'm going to work in MedTech and health tech quite a bit more now. But if it's not your core competency, you as a company and startup in particular, when you only have a small handful of individuals, it is unlikely that you will have the expertise to run a proper clinical trial. And hence, if you do not have the help from a CRO, while I'm not saying that you can't do it, anyone can, it's a time and opportunity cost, because you'll be working on your product, you'll be working on other things as well, right, to actually build your company. So it's the same. So you're looking at a CRO to give you that helping hand, people who are experts in running clinical trials per se, right? And so that they can help you do it seamlessly and in the right way from the very beginning. So that's the holistic overarching view why you would want to go to a CRO. I fully understand. I'm pretty sure right now someone in their head is saying it's very expensive. Everything comes at a cost. And I think this is where nothing is for free. And I think the expectation that someone else works for you for free or at a reduced cost, it would be naive. So even as a startup, you are a business, right? So you have to budget it accurately. If you budget for your product, it would be erroneous not to budget for a clinical trial to get your product to market, right? So it's something that you have to understand. It's part of the journey. Now, if you don't use a CRO, you have to hire somebody anyway. So in a way, it's somewhere in the budget. So it's up to you to decide whether it's your core competency you want to bring it in or to outsource it to someone who can actually do it better for you.
Good advice, Karen. And Jolene, yeah, maybe let's talk a little bit about costs. What should a startup budget for a clinical trial in Asia Pacific? And what are some of the drivers of cost? Is it the number of sites? Is it the number of patients? How do you typically advise a company that's a smaller company that's a bit cash strapped as they plan their trial activities?
Yeah, so I just can only share from my experience in the past 9 years. I started this company from scratch as an advisory consulting, and we have served at least 330 companies over the Asia Pac. Why work with the CRO? Let me also add on to the
please do.
With what Karen had said, because as a startup company, time is an essence for you. You need the right resources and expertise and the know-how to get results effectively and efficiently. And because of that, you need to bring in a CRO because they bring in depth understanding of the know-how regulatory, especially the current regulatory for clinical study, and how to accelerate your startup in execution. You need to understand the whole process because there are examples that company did not use CRO and try to figure out their ways. Until now, after 18 years, they are still trying to commercialize their product because they are stuck in a clinical study. So I advocate for CRO, not because I worked for CRO before, but really, unless your startup company have your expertise of clinical study expert who understand how to budget. And back to Frederick's question for me, how to budget this whole clinical study, I would say that about 12 to 20% of your total R&D costs. As a startup CEO, I really hope you budget at least 12 to 20% of your whole R&D costs for clinical trial. And it also depends on the classification of your product. So your clinical trial can run from a very small pilot, less than 50 patients, all the way to 2,000 registry studies. So you need really to think about the whole PDP, product development, it properly so that your product come out on time within less than 10 years.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And Karen, Jolene, either of you are welcome to answer this question. But as a startup, is budgeting for this? Are there any specific things that they can do to keep clinical trial costs down? Would that be limiting whatever they outsource, or would it be designing the trials a certain way to make sure that it's as cost efficient as it can be? Any thoughts or tips on how they can do that and be incredibly capital efficient?
I think it starts off with understanding what you want to achieve in your clinical trial and through the protocol. So where a lot of times is, if you have an idea, go and get a ballpark figure. Okay, so that's the word that you want to use when you go out to the CROs. You want a ballpark, just an understanding. But for them to actually give you a proper idea of how much it's going to cost, you have to nail down your protocol because it depends on how many sites you want, how many visits, because each one will mean more money. Spend, how many patients you want. So the thing where I do feel, and I'll give you both sides of the story, right? So when in CRO, everyone comes, oh, I want to do a clinical trial, give me the money, you know, tell me how much it's going to cost. And then they only give you a one-page abstract. There's so much you can do to tell them how much it costs, and then you have to give an idea of what it might be. And the variance can be between 20 to 30% minus or plus, really depend when you finalize the protocol. And then you get complaints, why was it, you know, normally why is it too expensive? But that's because you didn't tell people what needed to be done from the very, very beginning.
Right.
So then from our side, when I step onto the other side, right, trying to design the protocols, is I don't design on the basis that it's a nice to have in that protocol. You design it on the basis that it is something that is crucial for the next step. What the next step might be, is it crucial for regulatory approval, crucial for your reimbursement? That's what you need. If everything's a nice to have, you drop it. The more things you put in to be executed, the more expensive it's going to get.
Yeah, no, that's clear. Let me turn to Julian here. And I know that you are working not only with hospital pilots at Cedars-Sinai, but you do get involved with some of the clinical trials there as well. Any advice that you give with some of the smaller companies that you work with on how they can best structure their trials to be as capital efficient as possible?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. You know, when I see all the startups coming to Cedars, whether our programs or, you know, outside of our programs, you know, when they get the budget set up by our research administration team, you know, a lot of them are, you know, surprised because there's a lot of things that comes in, you know, beyond standard of care and all the procedures and the time of the PI with, you know, that always come with maybe like minimum 1% of the PI time, and based on the salary, that could be quite high. Then you have all the IRB fees and all the fee that comes with, to a point that sometimes companies are like, they can't, like it's too much. And we're talking about Cedars-Sinai. It's a big health system, lots of patients, so there's a lot of value. But what going through a program like the accelerator or investment, it kind of comes with some kind of we're gonna help those companies and maybe waive some of the fees, or maybe like really work with them hands on the protocol. And we are at that stage also when it comes to research administration, how to improve the setup of clinical trials, and to a point that looking using AI to maybe make things easier on the budget setup all the way to the protocol draft. Like we had that stage 2025 with all the LLM being developed, that maybe it's time to look at those and see how we can really make things more efficient for the startup, and get faster to market and faster to improving patient care.
Yeah, great point. We'll come back to some of the points you just raised there, Julian, as well. Just staying with you for a second, we'll come back to hospital pilots, but just tell us in a nutshell, how does a hospital pilot typically differ from a trial?
Yeah, no, it's always we always use the term pilots here and there, or trial, or study, or the way I look at things is clinical trials. There's something that is very oversight with IRB. You have a clinical trial agreements, you have a budget, you have a protocol, you have a PI. You want clinical evidence. You look at safety, efficacy of medtech or therapeutics. Pilot, and those we see it usually pre-commercialization for company devices that don't need to go to FDA or like get some regulatory clearance. So maybe digital medicine, not too risky. So those could be done as pilot. You don't need to go through IRB, and usually they're gonna be under like a quality improvement type of project, which has less oversight. You don't need to go through IRB. But but all the companies we see, it's either they're gonna end up in one of the bucket, or this is like a class 2 device, and with FDA you need a clinical trial. You're gonna need to go through the whole IRB approved study. Might be an exempt device, digital medicine tool like an app. A QI project, quality improvement might just be enough, and we can do a classic pilot. Avis was on the clinical trial side of things for their pediatric application.
Yeah.
So it really depends, what the product is about, what stage are you at, like if you're pre-commercialization. If you already have FDA clearance, well, maybe you want a pilot, or maybe you need another clinical trials for look at other things. But it really depends. But that's the difference.
Can I jump in and say?
Yeah, of course, John.
So, I agree with Julian, and the pilot can be done in a hospital or medical institution, and it already started from your concept, which is what your ideation process, where you want to transfer into the human testing of efficacy as well as safety. So, pilot can range from a preclinical study as well as in human being study. And that is very important because it really starting to prove safety, and safety is more of a key issue at the beginning of the whole PDP process of this clinical trial for pilot.
Yeah, thanks for that, Julian. We'll certainly come back to pilots here in a moment. Quick reminder to our cohort companies to queue up your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens, and we'll get to questions at the top of the hour. So let's talk a bit about clinical strategy, and maybe Jolene, let me turn to you perhaps first on this. A question we get very often from startups, and you probably do the same, are the regulatory considerations. What strategies should a company use to set up a trial, bearing in mind that they want to be able to use the data for a future US FDA clearance or US FDA submission? Can data collected in Asia Pacific generally be used for US FDA submission? Or what do startups need to keep in mind when they're planning that?
So clinical trial, as what Julian had mentioned, I totally agree, before commercialization is really meant for regulatory compliance, so of the in-country. So you all come back to your very beginning. What is your marketing strategy? How are you going to bring this product? Are you going to bring this product into US market, ASEAN? So you have to determine from the country perspective. If you're designing a product that you want to launch in US just as much as you want to launch in ASEAN, you want to consider that, can I kill two birds at one? So I can conduct a clinical trial from ASEAN that prep for future US submission as well. And for ASEAN, it only depends on the country that you conduct the clinical trial. US can accept foreign data, but you have to prove that the clinical trial are done under ICH GCP standards as an international good clinical practice standards, as well as it's a hybrid of combining some data from ASEAN as well as the local data in US as the bridge. There's what we call a bridge study, where you combine several different hospital sites and do the submission to the United States. So we all get back to the fundamental question, which country exactly you want to sell your product when you first launch in the market? That is a very fundamental question. Yeah. Everybody have to ask. That will tie back into your regulatory strategy and your clinical strategy. They all go hand in hand. So for the quick, short answer is yes, United States does accept foreign data, but it depends on the quality of data and which country the data coming from.
Thanks for that, Julian. And Karen, when AVIS was conducting its, and you may still be doing clinical trials, I'm not sure, with Cedars-Sinai and in the US, was that primarily with the US FDA submission in mind, or were those different types of trials?
Yes and no. So I think let me take a step back with this. While yes, you can use outside US data for submission to FDA, in recent times, they have been requesting for US data, and that has come quite strongly from not only the FDA, but from a lot of other countries with regards to submission. So it's a changing sort of like environment out there. What I would say is, it's right, you can do a multi-center if you have multiple sort of like fund sources, right? But go with where your first and your main market is going to be, would be the easiest. And the reason being, not all data is transferable. If your device, be it hardware, software, has differences in terms of how it is applied from a clinical workflow, then and you want to get FDA submission, you will have to do it in the US. Right? If it has genetic sort of like implications or sort of like phenotyping that is quite unusual, then you might have to do it in the US. So it depends on what product you have. Also, it depends on whether you're going de novo or 510K. In our instance, 510K, there were two strategies that we could have taken: fully bench, as well as sort of like do our own clinical trial, get our own data, and subsequently. We did hybrid, to tell you honestly. Okay. So when we got our data, it was between bench and whatever we did in Singapore already was sufficient for it. But in saying that, as we go along the path, as with all sort of like startups, your first approval might not be your last approval that you want to get for that particular product. So as you want to increase your indication, you need to take a look what you're increasing it for, where you can find the patients, and then subsequently, where you want to do that particular clinical trial.
Right. That's helpful. Helpful advice.
Yeah.
Julian, do you want to add to that?
So because FDA accept corresponding extended data, which is agreement to what Karen have just disclosed, the data are relevant, of high quality, and the study design endpoints will match the intended usage. So we should have a robust safety data and a clear demonstration of the device performance in the US labeling context. So yes, we can bridge, or what we are actually complementary data coming from foreign land in ASEAN. But again, these are all the strategy you have to think ahead of the time before you plan on it and have the budget be set aside for this purpose, which is quite key.
Good point.
You know,
Good point. Thanks for that.
in
Yeah,
the- in the-
Julian, go ahead.
Yeah, no, in this situation, I always assume you need US data, but you know, you always need to double check with FDA, you know, do a pre-submission or
Yeah.
pre-sub, ask them directly what they think. You know, here's my study in, you know, Singapore. Do you think you can accept those data? You know, you'll see. It really depends, but so that would be a really first step. Talk to FDA. if
Yeah,
you're in
no,
the-
that's great advice. We just had our regulatory webinar last week, and the importance of FDA pre-sub meetings must not be underestimated.
Oh, yeah.
Great point. Great point. All right. Well, Karen, I want to talk to you briefly about choosing clinical trial site partners. A lot of startups that we come across, they turn to their immediate KOL network to identify and expand clinical trial sites. And this was actually a question we received from one of our cohort companies. As a startup, how can we identify high impact clinical sites and engage KOLs effectively? What are your thoughts on that? And you've been in charge, if I'm not mistaken, at IQVIA or at Quintiles for clinical trial site management.
Yeah, I did that for many years. Still doing that in my new role. It's not an easy one. It's a bit of an art form, okay? So one resource you can always use is go to cttrials.gov, sort of like, you know, download the whole
Yeah,
entire
good
thing
point.
and just put it into Excel and see where are your highest performing site for the indication that you potentially want to look at, okay? That's the easiest and the cheapest way to do it. But there are other databases you can look at. Now, your caveat is if you go to a high performing site, you're fighting with everybody to get that site because that site delivers and they're known to deliver. You go to a less well-performing site, I think this is where you will have to choose based on what your needs are, right? You might not have that much competition to go in to use that particular site, but they might not perform to what you want. But so understand, just because you want a high-performing site, everyone wants it, and there is very limited resources in those sites. Okay? And they all know how premium they are. So you will need to sort of like understand you have to promote yourself to get into those sites alongside just saying, I want to pay you for it. That doesn't really work for those sites.
And it would I assume it would affect timelines as well.
Yes, because you might be in the queue.
You're in the queue, right? Yeah. Great point. Jolene, yeah, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's also one important thing to consider. Yeah, one of the strong important consideration is that you have to select a very strong KOL to represent your product, to advocate for your product. And this KOL have lots of colleagues who are their friends, and you can fully utilize the network that they bring to you. That to me is the most efficient, because I did quite a big trial in Japan, and we used a very well-known KOL, and he did help us to recruit the rest of the sites, which is fantastic because it's all their colleagues and they will motivate each other to get the patient for you. So having a very strong KOL as your board of director for scientific board, it's very important for a startup.
Great point. And I'll turn to Julian here as well, because obviously you, being within one of the US largest hospital systems, you do a lot of work directly with clinicians, and having that local champion, whether you're running a trial or whether you're running a hospital pilot, is, I understand, quite critical, if not absolutely mandatory.
That's step number one, really, like getting that, whether you want to do a pilot or clinical trials, you need to find that clinical champion that's going to be, yes, I want to help that startup, I want to use this product. And, you know, it works whether, you know, within the world of tech ventures, or we look at companies, whether it's for the accelerator program or to invest or to lead their round or whatever. That first step is like, hey, doctor, please review. Do you like it? Do you want to be the clinical champion? Meaning, you know, we're gonna need your help for the next few years, really supporting that company as a strategic investor. If we don't have that champion, it's gonna be really hard to do anything. It's, you know, health system or in a way run by doctors, and they have a lot of hours when they, which innovation they want to pursue. So yeah, if you cannot convince any doctor at Cedars, like that's not a good place to be at with your
Yeah.
product.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
that's
ultimately
fair.
they are the user. So let's convince them early in the process, in the
Yeah.
game. Yeah, Julian, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. Slightly different topic, Karen. I wanted just to get your perspective on something that Julian mentioned earlier in terms of new developments in the area of clinical trial management, and some of these could potentially provide cost savings for startups. But we hear about things like virtual clinical studies and decentralized clinical trials and remote monitoring and AI-powered enrollment and so on. Can you give us just a very brief overview of some of those new developments and how much of that should a startup in medtech be aware of, and where are maybe the benefits that could come out of that for a smaller company?
For MedTech, not really, to tell you honestly. Some of
Okay.
these have come up from the issues that happen in biopharma.
Yeah.
A lot
Yeah.
of it from decentralized clinical trials to
Yeah.
sort of like they originated from there.
Yeah.
The tech clinical trials tend to be of a different beast altogether. You're
Mm.
looking, for example, if you have an interventional device, you are looking for people who practice in the same so that you can get those as a site. So you keep it small, nimble, because you have to train the operator alongside, right? To
Yep.
do it. You're talking about remote monitoring. That one is it's a 50-50 right now, okay? Because the data is very, very hard to monitor and to audit. So it becomes a yes, you can think about doing it. Now, if you are a wearable and you have to do it as part of your solution, that's
Right.
fine. Of course, you
Yeah.
have to do it, right? But if you're using something else to help you, this is where you really need to see the acceptance of that particular remote monitoring device or solution, how well accepted it is, how seamless it is. Because what you don't want to do is put risk on top of what your risk is already, right?
Yeah.
Whatever you have needs to be established. So where I have unfortunately seen, and I know sometimes everyone wants to go into collaboration together because one startup is doing something, another startup, and they say, oh, hey, we will collaborate. So, but you understand the risk has just exponentially increased because both of you are in that still development stage. So I would encourage you to find a partner who's more established, who has a solution, right, that has been tested on the ground, because you just want to minimize that portion of risk for yourself.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. So let's talk a little bit more about hospital pilots, and I'll turn to Julian here on this perhaps first. To Cedars-Sinai, what makes a partnership between the hospital group and a startup successful, and what makes a pilot program successful? How do you typically collaborate with the smaller companies, and maybe what are some of the key steps that they need to go through if they're keen to work with Cedars-Sinai?
Well, like I said, the first step is always
Find
getting
that
that champion
KOL.
that going to support the project all the
Yeah.
way. Because we're talking, especially at Cedars, we really keen on innovating and bringing new solutions. So, most of the pilots that we have, we going to pay for them, whether it's paid through, tech ventures or directly through the departments. There's some budget allocating for that innovation, really improving patient care. And so when you start, you're the company, you have a product, you want to do a pilot, it convincing, hey, there's an unmet need, have a solution for you. The clinician is like, okay, I like it, I want to test it. Then comes a discussion about, okay, who's going to pay for it? What's the budget of the study or, the pilot? Because eventually you need to go to clinical operation and the VP level and senior VP and get that approval for that pilot, whether it's a QI project or some other framework, because somebody's going to pay for it. If you go to another health system, another, community hospital, they might have different approach. They might ask the company to pay for it, or it might be hybrid, sharing the risk. But, we see the value, and to a point that when you start a pilot discussion, you actually already starting the enterprise agreement discussion. We always, if we were to pay for a pilot, we want to make sure that department that's going to use that product or already have the budget for it for a full 1 year, few years agreement, service agreement with that company. So it's really part of the whole discussion. You don't go to CEDAR just to get one pilot and be gone. There needs to be a plan after that.
Yeah.
And it's really part of the whole story here. So that's why going through our tech ventures, when it might be combined with an investment or be part of the accelerator, that package, make things very attractive for, everybody. Is a win-win for the company. It can be at Cedars, we can help them. Because if you're a company knocking at Cedars' door and trying to get a pilot or a clinical trial, it's hard. It's very, there's so many people you need to convince. So that's why all programs are to make things easier to get in Cedars. And, other health systems have very similar approach over there. But yeah, clinical champion first step.
Yeah.
And the budget, who's paying for it, that's really coming pretty fast in the discussion. And keep in mind, these days, health systems are very strained financially, budgets are tight. There are like NIH, funding issues. So just keep in mind the budgets are very tight these days. And, they looking at pilots, you really need to be like that great product that really gonna save them money or improve patient care, like that value. You need to bring that value and convince not only a clinician but also the VP, operation level, that the value of your product.
Great point, Julian. Thanks for that. And you touched on it, and with a question we very often get from startups in our cohort is, once they start a pilot with a hospital, how do they ultimately convert it to one where they do get paid, and where they can make it a commercial rollout. So it's interesting. What you mentioned is that you actually pay for most of the pilots that you conduct at Cedars-Sinai. Not all hospitals obviously take that approach. But what you were saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that having that enterprise agreement and that final commercial agreement in mind early on as you start to discuss and plan your pilot makes sense. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's right. It's always part of the same discussion when you start coming to Cedars with your, product. You want that enterprise agreement, and, doing a pilot. We see the value in getting that service or that product. That's why, we pay for it. That's a strategic, investment in a way. But yeah, it's always the end goal is there, like, oh, I need that enterprise agreement. And if we go with you, that means we see the value is gonna improve patient care, it's gonna save us, X million a year. There's all this process at Cedars to evaluate all this new technology that comes in. And, it could be quite a process to go through. But it's there for a reason, making sure that at the end of the day, if we pay for the pilot, we get that service agreement in place, is going to impact Cedars in a very meaningful way. And that's why sometimes it's coupled with investing in the company to even bring them, really a higher value and really make a win-win for everybody.
Great point. And Karen, just turning to you, and I don't want to put you on the spot here. I know you have a relationship with Cedars-Sinai, but maybe some tips for startups that are maybe negotiating with a hospital group, whether in the US or in Asia Pacific, to run a pilot. What are some things that they should bear in mind and keep an eye out for when it comes to putting together an agreement, and some specific clauses in there that they should be particularly mindful of, based on your experience?
Yeah. No, I mean, having Julian and his team has been fantastic. So unfortunately, we were blessed in that sense to have a great partner, right? So we don't have that much problems in terms of, I guess, progressing. Okay, I'm not going to say that's going to be the same for everybody else,
Right.
and for any other system, to tell you honestly, because of course, as Avis is talking to others as well, and it's a bit difficult. But maybe one thing the agreement is just the agreement. You must understand, before you even get to the agreement, you have to understand you have a lot of hoops to jump through, which is anything from cybersecurity, risk management, logistics, IT infrastructure. those you won't even get to the agreement before you actually go through those stakeholders, and they
Great
all
point.
have their separate process to actually
Yeah.
do. So one is ensuring that you have enough bandwidth in your startup. So let's start up small, right? Start in Singapore, small plus time zone difference. Okay. You do need to have people that can bring the documentation together. So within Avis, we have one person who kind of like just does it on top of his day job, right? Because it's very onerous. You have to have it because you can't continue the discussion without it. You need to map out all the different departments. You do not want to have one missing at the time of agreement, because then the agreement stops. Because if that department hasn't signed off on it, you cannot actually go to agreement time. So it's a lot of it. So agreements actually the last. By the time you get there, it's like the same when they say that you're trying to look for a job, right? All jobs are gone before they actually get advertised. Everything needs to be sorted out before that. You have to understand that particular institute and their ecosystem and the stakeholders you have to go through. And I think going through sort of like program, we see this, they help us smooth that already. They already have mapped it out as much as they can. And some of it is still a journey. And I mean, we're still hand in hand, as Julian is saying, sort of like we do have bi-weekly calls to try and figure out, because things change as well on the ground, right? And US is quite a big sort of like country, many moving parts, and not only within CEDAS itself.
Great points. Thanks for that, Karen. Jolene, do you typically get involved in pilots in Asia Pacific, and do you see the same process taking place here?
Yes, in MedTech trials, we always name them pilot, pivotal, registry, and post-market study. We don't go phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So actually, pilot referring to the drug trials equivalent to phase 1 and phase 2.
So what we're referring to here as pilots is not that pilot, but the pilot that comes just pre-commercialization
Yes.
to drive adoption, essentially at the hospital level.
Yes, our pilot is the same definition in the industry. We only have one set of definition of MedTech clinical trial. Pilot is pre-commercialization, equivalent to pharma phase 1, phase 2. I actually is more expertise in MedTech clinical trial than pharma, because I spent at least all these years in the MNC company conducting clinical trial for MedTech. The answer to your question is that for pilots, it's the same thing as in for ASEAN or Asia-Pac. Asia-Pac have 18 countries at least. It's very convoluted independently. Every country have its own regulation. And lo and behold, that our ASEAN have harmonization of 10 countries. It does not mean they couldn't have imposed individual needs for individual countries' regulation additionally to what is harmonizing. So the quick question for your answer is, for ASEAN pilot study, pre-commercialization very much is still proving safety and efficacy. That's the definition of being a medical device. So yes, the process is very similar to the United States because we all derive from the same definition. However, I would suggest that in order to cut some costs or effectively get pilot studies successfully done for startup in Asia, is maybe you have to engage with a really good CRO or consulting person to help you to do partial decentralized trial. So I know that Karen touched about this. But for MedTech, a lot of my colleagues in CRO, some of the very brilliant in AI technology, they are starting to move towards the partial, when I say hybrid decentralized trial. So this is very powerful because that will save a lot of costs in having the need to go to sending resources to monitoring in real time for CRF comparison, rather they are able to retrieve data immediately. Again, this is just in the stage of partial hybrid, not completely 200% decentralized. But that might be something that startups should think about, how to save cost. And also work very closely with your KOL hospital. Within itself, they have coordinator. Some of them, some KOL who really, really like your product and advocates for it, they might even utilize some of his colleagues, like his resident fellows, to help you to push your product out, to push your clinical study out, which I think Julian will understand is the United States environment. A lot of time, all our key KOL will use their fellow to help in the trial to make it faster, because in their mind, they also have the benefits of getting the pilot study. It also help them for publication. And so you have to bear in mind, the pilot study data is not only for regulatory compliance, it can be of your publication to help your KOL as well as company for scientific marketing, evidence-based marketing, which is really important. So all these factors, you have to just consider which is the best way for your company at what stage and how to use your clinical data properly and how to select the right group of CRO or expertise in clinical study.
Very good, very good. Thanks for that. Before we leave the topic of pilots, just turning to Julian again. When a startup is working with an organization like Cedars-Sinai, do they typically already need to have reimbursement codes? Do they need to have regulatory approvals in place? At what stage typically do you work with a pilot that is really one that's geared to evaluating adoption?
Well, yeah, pilots, reimbursement codes are like, you don't really need to have your reimbursement strategy set up when you do a clinical trial or a pilot. It's in a way, those could help you figure things out with your reimbursement strategy. Medicare, CMS, they might need to see some, clinical validation or pilot validation. So at the end, like a clinical trial, the budget, the company is going to pay for it, sponsored clinical trials, a pilot, Cedars or the health system pays for it. So the cost is already covered.
Yeah.
And as pilots where you're going to test, your assumption with reimbursement, maybe trying to submit some claims and see how that works and try to figure out the workflow. And so, no, you don't need to, it could be great if you already figured your reimbursement, but I do know other companies that I see coming to us, especially from overseas, like the reimbursement is really just, they struggle a lot to understand how to start the process. And it's a long journey really figuring out how to do it in the US. But no, you don't need necessarily to have, if your product is, you're going through the reimbursement pathway, not paid by the health system directly, you can do a pilot and actually test your assumption during the pilot, maybe submitting some claims and see how that goes. But yeah, that's possible.
Good point. Thanks. I'm conscious of time. I wanted to make sure that we touch on post-market studies as well briefly. That's really a topic for a whole separate standalone webinar, but let's see what we can cover in 5 to 10 minutes. Karen, maybe I'll turn to you on this. Again, this is something I know you've been deeply involved in your past roles. For startups on the call here who may not be familiar with post-market studies, maybe tell us what they are and what some of the best practices are in designing post-market studies. Is it something that you've started to do already now at Avis, given that you have your regulatory approval now, I understand? And maybe share some of your experience on this.
Okay, so as per the title of it, it's post-market. So once you get your regulatory approval, you have already made sales and your product is out in the market for use. Hence, some companies do post-market studies, some of it mandated by the regulatory agencies, and some you do it because you want to look for additional data points. Okay, so the ones that are mandated normally are your high impact, sort of like high risk sort of like products that, your clinical trials, while it got you through regulatory approval, does not mean that it's totally safe. So you get a tag from the regulatory agencies. I want you to do a post-marketing study. Okay, so some of it for any one of you who are doing really your high risk one, it is something that potentially you have to think upfront, depending on how risky your product is. Okay. Now, for the other ones, when you're talking about post-market studies, for example, it's you are running studies to give you additional proof points for value-based care. So you are looking for data that will show that you reduce readmissions for ourselves specifically, that our product goes out there, it's cleared, right? The FDA say, fine, you can clear it, you can prescribe it, send it out to patients. But to us, then it can't be it, because we really want to make sure that it's valuable. Right now, sometimes you could, in the past, you wait for many, many years and then you collect all the data, and then, yeah, okay, fine, 20 years down the line, it's valuable. But to us, obviously, to accelerate it, you want to do a properly controlled study, right? It goes out there, you catch the right patient, all your data is actually properly monitored, and then you get the outcomes that you're actually seeking for. So kind of like in general, thematically, that's what a post-marketing study is.
Understood. And should startup typically, yeah, Jolene, go ahead.
I just want to add one point.
Sure.
So I just want to clarify, Karen, what Karen just said, that post-market study is actually conducting to show that your product has been approved but not really safe. No, it is actually to confirm a long-term safety and performance of this product. Once the product is going through the regulatory compliance, which are in-country regulator approved, it is safe. And in addition, they might ask for a more long-term safety and performance from the regulator, or sometime your company just want to do post-market study for generating more evidence-based marketing material. So that is really the key thing for post-market study, because if it is very much requested from the regulator, it will be very much like a registry study, and it should be conducted properly according to ICH GCP all over the world as well. But the key of this post-market study is also to detect the rare long-term adverse events not seen in the pre-market trials. So that is where to add more of understanding how to support your product risk management and life cycle improvement. So ideally, the post-market study really have to meet regulatory expectation and maintain compliance as well. But again, it really depends on the purpose that you choose to route.
Karen, did you want to comment on that?
No, I think she touched on the points that I was making, but the only thing I would caveat, never run a study for marketing's sake, because that is ethically wrong. So I know you were using them interchangeably, Jolene, but I just want to make sure it was not translated subsequently.
Yeah. Fair
yeah,
point.
when I say marketing, it means evidence-based medicine. To generate evidence-based medicine that marketing team use.
And I assume, given what how you describe this, for a startup company that does not have its in-house clinical team, working with a CRO for post-market studies would be mandatory as well? Or is it something that a startup can do without an external CRO?
Depends.
No, I think typically you need a bigger team of people to help to conduct. If it is a startup, it's less than 20 people, you really do not have the resources to effectively carry out a huge 2,000, 1,000 patients registry study.
Yeah.
I think it depends, Frederick, because when you're talking about the registries, a lot of them are KOL run.
Right.
And they get grants to do it so that it's arm's length away from the company. So I think this is where the business of that particular startup needs to align with what you want to do. Again, nice to have versus a need to have, sort of like post-marketing study. They are expensive, even from a biopharma, no matter how deep the pockets are, the return on investment, it's hard to justify, because as Jolene was saying, they are long-term studies.
Yeah.
If you're looking at them.
Yeah, and we spoke about registries, of course, as well. And I understand with registries, sometimes you work not just with the KOLs, but sometimes with the clinical professional associations, and that are the sponsors behind some of those registry studies.
Yeah.
Right?
So can I clarify something? When I say marketing in medical technology industry, nobody can generate marketing material without true clinical evidence data. And so when I say for marketing usage, they really have to quote from true clinical evidence data, or else your marketing material might not fly as much as what you like. So in all these Fortune 10 companies that I worked in, our marketing team actually worked very closely with our clinical team. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Julian, do you get involved in post-market studies at Cedar as much?
Not much, at least not as of now, but I'm sure we will have some in the future. I do hope so. Yeah.
So, so maybe just before we wrap up, Karen, Jolene, some of the biggest mistakes, issues that you might have come across that that startups may run into when they're planning post-market studies. That anything that we haven't touched on yet that you think is would be of value to bring up to our audience here.
I actually enjoy conducting post-market study, not only because it's a big size, but the product has been approved and it's in the market. I would like to see the performance among all the real patients or users. And a post-market study should be done in the big scale. And the last one that I did was across the United States, 50 sites. Can you imagine if I'm a clinical study manager, I have to manage 50 sites? I go crazy, man. So a lot of time we will utilize some CRO support, even minimally. Overall, it's conducted by our company, but we did have some CRO support. So if like 50 sites and registry study, and every PI is involved. And so literally the whole field, their expertise in the similar product usage, and that again, it's a very big scale of production. How long it takes, it took us about 5 years to finish this 50 sites trials, and it's about 2,500 patients. And it's very rewarding at the end because we did a lot of publication along the way and also the closeout of the study. And that really adds values to the product and the company where it's and also it gives a lot of good report back to the regulator where they want to see a long-term safety data. And that is very, very, yeah, especially for class 3 device.
Yeah. Excellent. Quick reminder to our cohort companies to queue up your questions. We'll get into Q&A in about 2-3 minutes. Thank you to our panelists. I will ask each of you before we wrap up here just to maybe give us your reflect on today's discussions and give us maybe some of your final tips and advice to the startups that are on the call this morning. Anything that we might have missed, anything that you'd like to reinforce. And maybe Julian, let me turn to you first.
Yeah, these are very, a complex discussion when it comes to pilot or clinical trials when you want to do those. And a health system like Cedars-Sinai, every case is slightly different depending on your product, where you are in the, the market, go-to-market strategy. Like, are you exempt from FDA? Are you class 2, class 3? Do you need, an ID with FDA? Like, there's so many. Every case is slightly different. So I cannot have a very universal answer to all those questions you asked today. Every company is probably gonna follow up asking more details, and I'm happy to do so. But yeah, the one thing is clinical champion, clinical PI. You need that. The one thing also to pay attention to is the health system like Cedars are big places. If you come with your product, you find a PI or a clinical champion, another clinical PI, somebody else, somewhere else might be doing the same exact thing and you don't know about it. And your own PI might not know about it. So that's why going through a program like Tech Venture, Accelerator at Cedars-Sinai, we have a good understanding of what's going on. And even though sometimes we miss those, but they do, because it's a big place, lots of and we also involve a lot of our IT department because they have a lot of, everything that has to do with EHR is very, very complex, and those are involve teams of IT specialists in EHR integration that needs to be involved all the way to the chief health informatics officers and the CIO and chief informatics officers. So all those needs to be involved in most of those new technology deployments. Yeah.
Great advice. Thanks for that. And we do have some companies that are in that space working with EMR integration. So thank you. Jolene, your final thoughts, tips, words of advice to the companies?
Yes, after I've served at this 330 company in the whole Asia Pac, these are my summaries for all the great founders and really well-established CRO. Or the CEO of your startup. These are my advice for you. First, please understand PDP process, your product development process, and why you need to have clinical study and strategy within your process, and how you're going to use these data correctly. Leave all the detail to a good CRO or a consultant who are expertise to get results for you. Selecting a wise and effective CRO is definitely a skill, because everybody always say that they can do and get you the moon and the sun, but in actuality, the results will tell it all. Understand your budget and your timeline, because you have very short time span to carry out and bring the product into your market. So understand your budget, how to use a budget correctly, and understand your timeline, because it affects your marketing and your commercialization process. Last but not least, you need to understand regulatory compliance in which country, and so you can combine all the countries' minimum requirements and conduct your clinical data to justify safety and efficacy. So last but not least, seek help and consult an experienced consultant like my company. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. And I will ask all of you, before I get to Karen here, you're all comfortable that we share your contact details with the cohort, and then our cohort companies can reach out to each of you directly. Karen, final words.
I think I'm going to go with Julian. It's complex. I think, Frederick, it's great that you have this platform that we can share for the last hour, and hopefully into the next 30 minutes with companies. But I think you need to understand your product really well, but also understand where you want to go. Your end goal will drive the steps that you want to take, and understanding that it's not only about the product, I'm so sorry, but if you're doing a MedTech product, it is about how it gets out there, how it integrates to the clinical workflow, and hence that's how you design your clinical trial to show the value, right? To satisfy both the regulatory sort of like needs as well as value-based subsequently when the time comes.
Great point. Thank you for that. And we are almost exactly on time. Thank you so much to our panelists. Julian, Karen, Jolene, great to have you on the panel. Don't hang up. We're going to go into Q&A in just a moment. But at this point, I will say thank you to our audience